Hey, future lawyer. Welcome to the LSAT Simplified podcast presented by Hey Future Lawyer, where we talk about all things LSAT, law school admissions, and otherwise. If you want to check out our free LSAT course, go to heyfuturelawyer.com to sign up for a free account today. Hey, folks. So today we are doing a bit of a mailbag episode, partly because it is mid-May, and with a lot of people recently graduating college, or even if you are in college, now it's the summer, there's a lot of uptick in terms of who is studying for the LSAT. And with that, over the past week, I've had a lot of odd conversations. Not odd in that they're not uncommon, but they're filled with misunderstandings about the process. So this is meant to just be a chance to hit on those, basically going through Instagram DMs primarily. So first off, I had one person reach out to me, and I had posted, as long as you have a bachelor's degree, you can go to law school and be a lawyer. And then I said, even if your GPA is low, you can still find reputable schools to take you. Now, I'll be honest, this is a little bit of engagement bait, but this is true. If you have a low GPA, you can still go to law school. You can still get full rides. You can even get into pretty top schools. But it's one of those things where you do need the high LSAT. Like, that is the subtext. If you show up with a 2.5 and a 150, everyone's going to tell you to fuck off. If you show up with a 2.5 and a 175, it's still an uphill battle, and you will have to explain why you have since increased. Like, for example, if you are fresh out from that 2.5, say you are a 22-year-old and you graduated when you were 21, the law schools are going to have a harder time swallowing that pill than if you are 30. And even if you're 30, they're still going to be concerned for two reasons, which is one, you did fundamentally screw up back when you were in school. And the LSAT, while it does indicate kind of your horsepower and how hard you can work at one test, it's very different than an academic setting where you have to do classes and that sort of thing. And then further, it's one of those things where you still have to be reported to the US News. Law schools largely care on numbers, one, because they're predictive, but two, because they really affect their rankings. And as such, if you have a low GPA, that holds them back. That being said, they have a number of people who they kind of can write off because they're not calculated based on means, they're calculated based on medians, which means that their very lowest and very highest people sort of don't count. It's also why there's diminishing returns to a high LSAT. Like, if you're applying to a regional law school, as in, let's say a school with an average of like a 161 LSAT and you have a 170, the difference between a 170 and a 179 is somewhat negligible because they only get to report the median. And so you're only bumping them up one spot. It's not like they get to like calculate your 179. They just get to bump up their median by 1 point if you have a high score. So it's one of those things where, I guess if I have to explain that too deeply, like, once again, not to be academically elitist, but it's not the field for you. The point is that there's diminishing returns to really high or really low numbers. As in, like, yes, it hurts and you are now dragging the school down, but whether you are a 3.0 or a 2.9 or a 2.7 is somewhat negligible because they all hurt equally in a weird way. Anyways, so this person reached out and said, your best bet is at least a 3.8. That's still super low. And it's like, that's not super low to go to law school. It's like, if you're trying to go to Harvard, a 3.8 is quote unquote super low. But overall, like, there's plenty of schools where a 3.8 is above median. So, it really does depend on goals. Like, I'm someone who really advocates that you go to schools where the ROI is worth it. And often those are schools that have higher, well, not often. They basically are schools that have higher entry metrics. But the idea that you need like a 3.8 and a 170 to go to law school is just straight up not true. And it's funny because I'm not the person who's out here saying like you should go with low scores. I don't think you should. I think if you can't crack like a 155, it says really concerning things about either your academic ability or your willingness to work hard at something for a long time. So anyways, I would say that stay off Reddit. A lot of you are way too online. And due to being so online, you end up with this false expectation of what it requires to get into good schools. I think part of it is Reddit/law school admissions, which is a resource that people are naturally gravitated to because it's the online forum of people going through this process. In your life, you probably don't have a lot of people that are experiencing law school admissions as you are. But the downside of that is it really is the blind leading the blind. And one thing you run into on Reddit is a lot of the most antisocial, awkward people that are really off-putting, and they tend to underperform their numbers. So you'll see someone on Reddit who has like a 179, 3.9. I actually think there's actually, let me pull this person up real quick. They've been on r/law school admissions for a while. This is Sir Ellum Woods. And you may recognize that if you have been on law school admissions. And the reason I mention this is because this is someone who bombed their, okay, they actually deleted their account. That's sad. Let me see if I can find it real quick, just in case it is under a different one. The point is that this person had really high numbers unless they were lying, which I don't think they were. And they kind of struck out in admissions. And what people often extrapolate from that is like someone with a 179 and like 3.9 didn't get into these schools. They're like, oh, therefore you need those. But what they're failing to consider is that while law schools do care about numbers because they care about their medians, they also don't want absolute psychos or awkward people at their law schools or people that don't know what to talk about. So you can, like, yes, this is a very numbers driven process. And what I mean by saying numbers matter is it's like if you have good numbers and you're average, you're fine. If you have good numbers and you're below average, you're fine. You just can't have good numbers and then be a total psycho dummy, because that is where it goes off. And people also never admit it's their numbers. Like I guarantee that person, they've been spending so much time on Reddit. They're one of the most active posters on this subreddit, yet they objectively bombed. And I'm guessing this is someone who thinks they know a lot about law school admissions, but when it came to actually going through it, they sucked at it. They put schools off for some reason. And it's not like, this isn't about who you are in terms of like your background experience, because people will often be like, oh, maybe they didn't have an impressive resume. And like from working with people, it is not your resume. It is all how you portray yourself and largely how you write. So it's one of those things where I would just say try to stay off the internet. I mean, not the internet, but like Reddit is so full of bad information, and you all end up with very misconstrued expectations of what you require. Like if you have a 170 and you don't write like a psycho, you can probably get yourself into a T14, assuming you're like above a 3.5. And I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but that genuinely is true. It's just that so many of you suck at applying that's where it goes off the rails. And then I have, what are some other ones that we had? Trying to find some, because I had some silly, yeah, one person reached out to me. They said, I think I have understanding problem on LSAT or English. Do you have any suggestions? And I was like, yeah, like you have to speak English. I mean, this is kind of a bad one, but they, yeah, we won't do that one. I'm trying to see what other ones are good. And we're all just kind of banging out some MailChimp ones. Yeah, one person asked about, that's actually not a good one to do. All right, yeah, this is a good one. So someone says, hi, my name is so-and-so. I just graduated with an engineering degree and a 2.6 GPA. I have a raw LSAT score of 162. I don't know what that means. Like you didn't study, because they say I've applied to a few schools but only been waitlisted. I'm like, right, because you have a 162 and a 2.6. A 2.6, and like we talked about earlier, when it's fresh, it is much more concerning. Because if it's 10 years ago, schools can at least kind of go, okay, this sucks, objectively speaking, but it was in the past. And as such, we can swallow it a little bit more. But 2.6, like 2 months ago, that's a problem. That means a 2.6 is indicative of who you are. And as much as you want to say that that's not who you are, a 162 is also not the alleviation, because it's like you're probably decently intelligent, but you're not a hard worker, as shown. And I'm extrapolating a lot from your GPA and LSAT, but that's what they're doing too in law school admissions. Like when I see a 2.6, 162, I see someone who's like kind of smart, but doesn't study. And you're not a genius either. Like this is not someone, because there are people that score higher than a 162 without much effort. So you're like not a super genius, nor are you a hard worker. That is going to be a problem for law school admissions. So with that, they continue. I plan on taking the June LSAT, and I'm currently in an LSAT course. Can you recommend some schools to apply to? And I was like, no. I just said applying this cycle is insane. You're going to get absolutely skinned in terms of tuition to attend schools that do not justify it. But it was funny because they said, I'm an Eagle Scout. I have 5 years of work as an operator for road construction. I was a D1 esports athlete. I'm like, dog, no one cares. You have a 2.6, 162. You are academically not ready. Like if I had to bet, you're not someone that's going to crush it in law school based on, like the GPA is much more concerning than the LSAT. I mean, don't get me wrong, the LSAT's not ideal. A 162 can probably go higher, and it probably should go higher, especially if you have a 2.6, because you're going to really need to indicate to them that you are a crusher, given that you've shown yourself to have real, like a 2.6 is going to be really hard for them to swallow. And I don't know what school you went to, but most schools have grade inflation. You went to an SEC school, not exactly known as like the Harvards of the world in terms of academic competition. So not to be rude, but like they're going to have real questions about your academic horsepower. And a 162 doesn't say you're a dum-dum, but it also doesn't say this 2.6 was a fluke. Like when I read this, I read someone who's like trying to take shortcuts. Also, the fact that you're trying to squeeze in this cycle, you didn't respond, like, because I said that like, hey, applying the cycle is insane. You're going to get absolutely skinned in terms of what you pay to attend schools that don't justify. You left me on red. So I think that you might be in a little bit of, I don't want to say denial, but looking for shortcuts, and not, I guess it is somewhat denial because you're unwilling to do the work that is actually required. And like, this is a lot of extrapolation, but I see this and it's like, just don't go to law school if this is what you're doing. What else do we have? Yeah, I mean, this one was concerning. This is from someone who says, hello. I am coming from Bangladesh recently. I am post-graduated from Bangladesh in law. Do I capable for LAST exam in USA? And it's just like, I mean, technically you am capable, but also this is going to be a real issue in that you're going to have to learn English, which I know is harsh, but like that is not English. I am coming from Bangladesh recently. Like I am coming is present tense. Recently means past tense. So it's like, which one is it? Which I know it's like, don't get me wrong. You have me speak a different language. I'm going to sound way worse than this, but I'm also not trying to go become a lawyer in Bangladeshi or whatever language they speak there. You are trying to come be a lawyer in English, and which means you are going to have to compete in English, and you cannot speak English. That is going to be a fucking problem. And then I am post-graduated from Bangladesh in law. I mean, I get what you're saying, which is either you are coming to the US soon, or you came recently and you have a degree from Bangladesh in law, and you're wondering if you're allowed to take the LSAT. I mean, this also gets to a broader point, which is talk to Google. Like, if things are pretty straightforward, which is like, can a Bangladeshi citizen take the LSAT? I don't know why people just go to like the LSAT expert. It's like, this is not a question. I mean, I can answer it because, like, yes, everyone's eligible to take the LSAT, but like, you can be a North Korean theoretically. I guess you might have trouble getting internet access and all that good stuff in North Korea. But it's also one of those things where, like, this is not a question for me. This is a question, and it just indicates a lack of resourcefulness. That's going to be a problem because if you can't Google things and you can't write English, I mean, it's harsh, but it's like, what do you think this is going to do? And I said, I mean, I was actually pretty nice. I was probably nicer than I should have been. I said, hey, so and so, you can take it internationally. It is a very strict test of the English language, so having proficient English is very important, which was meant to be a call out of like, hey, you don't have proficient English, therefore you should figure that out. I didn't say that. I probably should have, but she didn't respond, which is funny. It's like, no, thank you. Like, screw you, lady. I'm kidding. Anyways, so this was from a high school kid. They said, hey, I'm currently deciding between Brown and Columbia for my undergrad with the hope of going to a top 10 law school. I won't question the top 10 law school, but what I will say is that's an arbitrary distinction. For one, the rankings change. Second, school 9 is not different from school 11. And then school 1 is very different from school 7. So like there's a lot of fluctuation. I would think a lot more about what you want to do. Like, do you want to do a federal clerkship? If so, you should be aiming for the top of the top 10. Do you just want to go to big law? In which case there's plenty of schools in the top 20 that are easily going to place you there, regardless of not being a quote unquote top 10 law school. So you all should really, I mean, the rankings are just, they're so fucking stupid. I don't know why you guys care. I don't know why you care about top 10. I don't know why you care about top 50. None of it is real. What's real is employment. So like, also the rankings are like, look over the past 10 years and how much they've changed. Like there are schools that are kind of steady. Yale has been #1 forever. Stanford has always been up there. I mean, the top 14 has been relatively stable. There's been a little bit of rejiggering, but if you look past that, like the top 100, there are schools that were like 25 that are now like 90, like UC Law SF, which used to be called Hastings, but apparently he was like a bad old white dude who I don't know what he did. I know he did something to where he got canceled and his name got taken off the school. I don't even know who Hastings was, but I wonder if that's Paul Hastings, like the law firm. I don't know. Maybe it is. Anyways, the point is that these rankings are completely arbitrary. These cutoffs are not real. The cutoffs you should care about is what kind of outcomes you get, because that matters. Like if you want to go to big law, there are schools you should go to, but it's not based on some arbitrary list that US News puts out. It's based on the outcomes, which are public. They continue and say the average GPA at Brown is a 3.7, while at Columbia it's 3.6. And Brown has many practices like the option to take any class pass fail that create grade inflation. Yeah, I mean, grade inflation is everywhere. So I wouldn't pick an undergrad based on the 0.1 difference. I mean, realistically, getting a 4.0 at Columbia and Brown will be easy if you game it. And by game it, I mean, take the right classes, take the right major. If you know you want to go to law school, your job really should just be get the maximum grade possible. Further, you should minimize debt. Like, it is true that a Brown or Columbia undergrad is worth mildly more than, like, let's say going to Colorado State, which is like a pretty average school in the state I'm from. That being said, is it worth $200,000 for like a 0.1% difference in your law school outcomes? Like, I don't think so. So it's one of those things where if I was talking to an 18-year-old who knew for sure they wanted to be a lawyer, my advice would be go to a law school or not a law school, an undergrad where you'll be happy and where you can minimize debt. Because obviously there is the factor of like, it is 4 years of your life and you don't want to be miserable the whole time. But going for prestige, like you guys are not going into investment banking. This doesn't matter. In the legal world, no one cares where you went to undergrad. What they care about is where you went to law school. And I'm not saying there aren't little subjective things that help. Like, sure, you're going to get probably a stronger network at a school like Brown or Columbia than you get at like an average school. But if you're going to law school, that's where you're going to create your true network. So if you know for sure that you're going to law school, it's so silly to pick a school based on. I mean, I saw this on fucking TikTok. Some undergrad kid picking what school they're going to go to between UT, as in Texas, which is where I live currently, for those of you that don't know. Like I live in the Austin area, and Cornell. And they got into both these schools and they're like, which one do I pick for pre-law? And it's like, dog, it doesn't fucking matter for pre-law. Like it's not real. It's literally not a factor. It's straight up like as law school, but it's so funny because there's all these people in the comments, probably other 17-year-olds giving their opinions like, oh, UT has such a strong pre-law program. You have to go there. It's like, I don't know, maybe, but also none of that's real because what actually matters when you're applying to law school is not whether you went to UT or Cornell, which also, let's be real, both of those schools have name recognition. These are not like the San Jose States of the world. And then further, it's what is your LSAT and your GPA? Because I promise you, like, while I just kind of threw a straight at San Jose State, a 160 from San Jose State beats a 158 from Cornell. And that's reality. So, like, yes, is it a like marginal difference on the very margins? Like, technically, when all else is equal, but all else is never equal. It never gets to the point where this is the tiebreaker. There is always something better to break the tie on, usually numbers. And then if not numbers, letters of recommendation. Like, how did they know you? How did your professors know you as a person? Or your personal statement? How do you write? So like theoretically in a vacuum, could it get to a point where when there's two equivalent people, someone from Brown would take the cake over someone from San Jose State? Like, yeah, it could happen. Also, this is a silly, ridiculous hypothetical that will never happen because there's so many factors that matter more that will always be evaluated prior to them getting to what undergrad you went to. Outside of like, I mean, Yale kind of has prestige implications, but that's kind of the only one where like it really matters. Anyways, we'll continue. And people always point to like, oh, there's more people that go to Harvard. Like there's tons of Yale undergrads that go to Yale Law School. And Yale's a bit of a exception. And the reason for this is Yale does faculty review. So they have professors that sit on the admissions board. This is not common for most of the schools. Most of the schools just have their admissions committees. And the thing with Yale is, and the theory on this, I don't know if this is 100% true, is that these kind of old professors have a bias towards people from other quote unquote elite institutions and a bit of a snobbery / look down on the more average universities. And as such, they bias towards the higher ranked people. Further, Yale is somewhat insulated in that they have an abundance of applicants, which is not the case at most schools. Like most schools just are trying to maintain the rankings with the applications they get. Like Michigan, if Michigan just started taking people from elite law school or elite undergrads, they're going to start dropping in the rankings because their numbers are going to start falling. There's not enough applicants from these top schools to maintain classes. However, Yale can't because Yale only takes 100 people and it's everyone's first choice. So do you think Yale can get 100 good applicants from the elite universities? Like they can. So is it like kind of a thing? Kind of, but also it's not something where it has nearly the effect that people think it does. Anyways, that's a lot of me talking to really not talk to this person's question. So yeah, Brown has GPA inflation. So they continue. I think it'd be easier for me to get a high GPA at Brown. I'd argue it's probably the same. It'll probably be easier where you're happy. So I'd go where you're happy. I said, that being said, I also believe Columbia has more internship opportunities and possible extracurricular opportunities, given that they're in New York City and are a top law school, which I told them ain't none of that real. Like no one cares what internship you did in law school. The question is, what's your GPA? What's your LSAT? And that's the entry ticket. Like at the very top schools, it does matter that you weren't like a total recluse. You can't have done nothing. But the idea that like working at Chipotle disqualifies you from going to like Harvard is just not true. You can get in if you are compelling. I mean, you all really underestimate. It's not about what you did. It's about how you spin it. How you dress things up is so important. I will tell you, quote unquote, impressive people way underperform their numbers all the time because they don't present it well. And then people that have legitimately just like worked at Chipotle through undergrad will overperform their numbers when presented in a proper way. So like if you, I mean, it's funny, if you're someone who's like, I have a bit of imposter syndrome because I don't think I've done anything in undergrad. I mean, like, I think you should have, but also at the same time, it's not really the end of the road as people tend to think it is. Because it's like, first off, crush your numbers. That's step one. And then second, just present it well. If you present it well and, you know, twist things, you can do pretty well. And then further, a lot of people fuck up in there. I mean, you guys do not believe how bad, like listen back to other episodes of the pod. Your all personal statements, they suck. They're so bad. Like you guys cannot write. It is genuinely impressive how few personal statements are like even mediocre. It is absolutely impressive how terrible you are at all writing. Not all of you, but also, I don't know. When I see one that like doesn't have massive overhauls, it is so uncommon. They continue. Which do you think is best for the purpose of law school admissions? So yeah, choosing between Brown and Columbia. You'd say the GPA at Brown is higher. The internship opportunities are better in Columbia. I'd say where you want to be. I mean, I would probably lean Brown just in terms of the GPA, but also like, let's be real. One of them is in New York City. The other is in, where is Brown? Rhode Island. I think it's where you're going to be happier. So I don't know, like it's up to you. And then you said, do you think there's a big enough difference for me to really consider that as a factor? I said, no, I think they're both going to set you up well for law school admissions. It's where you're going to be happiest. So which is what I told you. I was like, you're going to just go somewhere where you're going to enjoy life because fundamentally it's 4 years of your life and the difference is really what you make of it. All right, let's see what else we got. hold on. Where and other news, just like while we go through it, the LSAC raised prices again on law school, or not the law school, the LSAT. So it was $248, or no, 238 the prior year to take an LSAT. It's now 248, so it went up $10. This is it's been increasing pretty consistently. I believe it was 200 when I took it in 2020. I could be wrong, but I think that's right. Then in 2021 they raised it to 215, so a $15 increase. Then in 2022 they raised it to 222, which is a $7 increase. Then $16 to 238, and now they're at 248. Oh, sorry. And now, okay, yeah, so 248. So it's been going up. It probably will keep going up year over year. I don't know. Well, I guess I know why, which is like quote unquote inflation and costs are going up. I don't know that that's true. If you ever look at LSAC's books, which are public, they're a nonprofit, so you can look them up by searching up ProPublica, LSAC. They have a lot of money, so I don't know that 10 extra dollars. I mean, $10, well, it's not super large over the course of they administer what, like 100, no, more than 100,000, a couple 100,000 LSATs a year. Let's call it 200K. That could be off. That's a what, $2 million in revenue. I mean, it's not nothing. So like they are, and if they have called 100 million in revenue, that's like a 2% increase. So I get why they do it. Also, it's frustrating for people because I'd say largest resentment towards this is the idea that there's no other option. If you want to go to law school, you kind of have to take the LSAT. There are quote unquote other options, but they're not. If you want to get actual good offers, you have to take the LSAT. So it's one of those things where people get frustrated because it is basically the only option. All right, let's see what else we had. I thought I had more questions. Oh, here we go. So this is from someone said, hey, I love your post. Often get them on my For You page. I'm like, nice, because I am good at the algorithm. I kid, but I do my best. But she continues. I was wondering what you think about scoring low 170s and going to a T14 in this upcoming cycle. Is it worth it to retake a 172 if I'm planning on applying for 2026? So it's like, yeah, I mean, you can definitely get into a T14 with a 172. The idea that you can't is just Reddit nonsense. I mean, I had someone who applied this year with a 172 4.0, and she got a full ride to UCLA. She got basically a full ride to Vanderbilt. Actually, let me just pull up her results real quick so I can read them off. Because this is a 172, and don't get me wrong, a 4.0, so she's not a dum-dum. But the point, more broadly, is that you do not need crazy numbers to get a really good outcome. So let's see. So she got uh-oh. Are these her results? No, these are not her results. Oh no, they are. Wait. Yeah, so she got into Duke for 50% off. She got into USC for 80% off. She got a full ride to Miami, an 80% discount to go to UT, a full ride to UCLA. And yeah, so anyways, the point is that like you do not need these crazy numbers. Like, yes, would a 174 help? Sure. But you definitely don't need a 172 or higher than a 172 to get good outcomes. Like a 172, yes, is better, but it's such Reddit nonsense where people are like, oh, I can't get in, I'm gonna have to retake. Yeah, so like what I told this person is you probably should retake if you have more points in you, because it does matter. If you can score higher, it is going to make a tangible difference in your admissions outcomes. But once again, the idea that you need a 175 to even get into a T14 is just such nonsense. Like the math just does not bear out. Already, what else do we have? So here's another, we're gonna skip that one. I actually didn't have as many as I thought. I thought I was gonna have some good ones, but turns out we don't have as many as I thought I would. So this is a tricky week just because I've been super busy. It's kind of behind the scenes stuff. So unfortunately, I did this whole gig of doing LSAT admission so that I didn't have to do the big law hours. Unfortunately, I've somewhat fallen into that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in a few logical reasoning questions on the back end of this, which, let's be real, are probably more useful than me just like rambling about LSAT nonsense. So anyways, listen to those. They're much more useful than what I just blabber through. And I'm going to figure out how to better organize these so I can do more kind of long episodes talking through things that, I don't know, I think you guys enjoy me yelling at people, at least for those of you that I hear from. So I think you enjoy that. But also at the same time, the best value isn't actually learning how to do the LSAT. So we're going to cut over to that.
Okay, question 4. The consumer says, the latest Connolly report suggests that Oxenfry prepackaged meals are virtually devoid of nutritional value.
Okay, so this is a fact. We know that this report does in fact claim that Oxenfry meals do not have nutritional value. I'm picturing like lean cuisines or Lunchables, some sort of like, the meals all thrown together. Now, whether or not they actually are devoid of nutritional value and hence are healthy or not healthy is not something we know. We know Connerly says they're unhealthy or at least lack nutritional value, but whether or not that claim is true is still not really established. So I'm ready for them to make a judgment one way or the other. I don't know if we're going to say, therefore, the Connerly report is good or bad, but I'm expecting them to go in that direction.
But the Connolly report is commissioned by Danto Foods, Oxenfry's largest corporate rival, and early drafts of the report are submitted for approval to Danto Foods' public relations department.
Okay, so we're learning more about the Connerly report. It comes from Danto Foods, which is some made up company who is a rival with Oxenfree. So we have motive for why they would want to like slander Oxenfree. But also, you can be someone's rival and still tell the truth about them. Like maybe Danto Foods is just saying like Oxenfree's food actually is garbage. Like if you are the corporate opponent of Lunchables and you say Lunchables is bad for you, I have to imagine that's probably true. And even though you're a rival, does not mean you are wrong. So if they say therefore Connerly or the Connerly report is incorrect, I would go, well, no, like this is a possibility that they're incorrect, but the source of an argument does not affect the actual merits of the argument. So I'm very on guard for them to like basically just make an ad hominem flaw and attack Connerly and say, therefore, this report is nonsense. But once again, this is just another fact where it comes from. Still no conclusion. I'm just trying to think ahead about where they may go with this.
Because of the obvious bias of this report, it is clear that Oxenfry's prepackaged meals really are nutritious.
So yeah, that's exactly what we thought might come out, which is they go way too far the other direction. Like we know that it is biased. That is true. But bias does not make you wrong. It is very possible that Danto Foods is actually telling the truth about Oxenfree's like terrible for you Lunchables. It is possible they're lying, but we don't know. We don't have enough information here to say one way or the other. Yet our conclusion does say that. They say it's for sure good for you. And like, no, it might be good for you. It also still might be terrible for you because just being biased does not mean that you are wrong.
Yeah, it's very possible, like you said, that both things could be true. They could be biased and the meals are bad for you. There's we have no actual evidence that they're necessarily good. Right? And the question asks us, the reasoning in the consumer's argument is most vulnerable to criticism on the grounds that the argument.
So yeah, it's a pretty standard flaw question, basically asking us what the argument has done wrong. Having been a critical reader, we already know what they've done wrong, which is we've treated bias as evidence of someone being wrong, whereas it's really just evidence that they could be wrong. But when we say with such certainty, we've committed a flaw. So I would look for something along the lines of bias is evidence that you are incorrect.
All right, so answer choice A says treats evidence that there is an apparent bias as evidence that the Connolly report's claims are false.
Yeah, I mean, that feels just like a paraphrase of what we said, which is that we know that Danto Foods is in fact a corporate rival, therefore they are wrong. And I'm like, well, yeah, I see nothing wrong with A to object to. So I would probably go with A at this point and then read
Yeah,
on see if there's like I always read all five just to make sure. But
me too. It just because you never know. I always say, even if you're willing to bet money that answer choice A is correct, which I think we both of us would here, I always joke that we at least need to make eye contact with those remaining answers, just kind of a due diligence thing.
yeah,
Because sometimes if it's, a sneaky question or it's a more challenging question, sometimes they're clever with the way they might phrase something. We might just misread something slightly and realize, oh, wait, actually, answer choice E is more accurate. Again, unlikely in this situation. I feel like we feel fairly confident it's going to be
yeah.
A, but again, always just good to cover our bases and read the remaining ones. So B
Well,
says, oh yeah,
yeah,
go
as,
ahead.
as a human, you're just not perfect. So like you might totally miss
Yeah,
something. And like it's for you to miss one thing, that's one mistake. For you to miss it twice, you'd have to make two mistakes. And the exponential difference, like let's say you have a 10% chance of making each mistake. That means on 90% of questions, you might miss it on the first answer, but on only one, or sorry, 10% of questions, but on only 1% are you going to make that mistake on two answers. So you really give yourself like two chances to make sure that you have not messed up. And it also takes like, let's be real. We've read this critically. We know what kind of answer we're looking for. If
hmm
Madeline or I were doing this ourselves, these four answers are probably going to take us like 5 cumulative seconds to go through all of them.
yeah.
Like,
It's really just a quick scan, a quick once over, just to make
and
sure. Yeah.
we'll talk through that like way more in depth to go through each answer. But like in our heads, this would not be a fast process. We would have been done by the time I said this whole sentence with B, C, D, and E. But for our purposes, let's go through those ones.
So B says, draws a conclusion based solely on an unrepresentative sample of Oxenfry's products.
So in my experience teaching LSAT, people love to pick these answers, even though I find that they are often not justified. For a sample to be an issue on the LSAT, they actually need to indicate that there was something wrong about the sample. So for example, if we had said Oxenfree has Lunchables, therefore their, I don't know, rotisserie chickens are unhealthy for you, that would be an unrepresentative sample because we'd be going from the Lunchables to the rotisserie chickens. But we're not doing that here. We're just talking about their Lunchables. So who cares? That is absolutely a representative sample.
Yeah,
And we
the whole
that
time.
switch.
Yeah, they're always talking about these prepackaged meals. C says, fails to take into account the possibility that Oxenfry has just as much motivation to create negative publicity for Danto as Danto has to create negative publicity for Oxenfry.
So yeah, C is technically true. We do technically fail to take that into account. The issue is that we just don't care. We're not talking about, is there some corporate media war that is happening between these two companies? We're only talking about one direction of it, which is Danto Foods making nonsense claims about Oxenfree? So whether or not Oxenfree is creating negative publicity about Danto is just not relevant. We just don't care what they're doing. We care about Danto's claims. So I'd say superficially, this looks good, but if you know what we care about, which is the Connerly report false? Is it misleading us about nutrition? You can know that this one just does not matter.
Yeah, when in doubt, just go back to your argument and go back to that conclusion. What specifically is our argument discussing? That can always help reorient yourself if you find you get a little bit, thrown off. Maybe you're tempted by some of these superficially sound these answers that superficially can sound maybe okay if we don't really understand the argument clearly. Not even understand, but sometimes even just in reading the answers, sometimes it can be easy to forget the specifics of what they said. So when in doubt, just go back to the text. They don't take it away. D says, fails to provide evidence that Danto Foods prepackaged meals are not more nutritious than Oxenfries are.
Yeah, so I'd say it's a similar issue to C where that's not on trial. We're not talking about our Dantos Foods meals nutritious. We're talking about our Oxenfrees. So D is true. We do fail to provide that evidence. And so often people focus on yeah, we did actually fail to do that because anything we have not explicitly addressed has not been provided. However, we just don't care. Danto Foods is not on trial. It's Oxenfrees that we're talking about.
And E says, presumes without providing justification that Danto Foods' public relations department would not approve a draft of a report that was hostile to Danto Foods products.
So on this one specifically, I mean, there's probably more than one reason why this is wrong, but I see Danto Foods. I'm we're not talking about Danto Foods. We're talking about the Oxenfree foods. So when we're putting in this report that tossed out of Danto Foods products, I'm okay, but that report did not exist. The only report we had was one hostile to Oxenfree. So, I mean, you can often nitpick multiple reasons, but to me, that's the damning reason of that's not what we're talking about.
Even if it did say Oxenfry as well, I think then it would be factually untrue because they did approve a draft of a report that was hostile to Oxenfree's products. So you wouldn't even be describing something that happened.
Yeah, and that's a great point, which is that often there are multiple reasons why these answers are wrong. The good thing is you only need one reason to conclusively eliminate them. I mean, to pick an answer, you should at least be able to go to bat for every word in the answer as either synonymous to the passage or, well, I should be careful with that because you're not looking to match words. You're looking to match ideas of well, not even match, but fill in the ideas. Because here, this was not in our passage. We just saw it as a missing hole. So anyways, the point is though, is that right answers, everything needs to be defensible. Wrong answers, it can all be good except for one word. And I mean, none of these answers were good except for one word. But if they were, they would still be wrong. Question 5, scientists. Earth's average annual temperature has increased by about 0.5 degrees Celsius over the last century.
All right, so we just have a fact here about temperature increase on Earth. A not so fun fact, I would say, about rising temperatures, that it's increased 0.5 degree Celsius.
And this is where you also have to leave your LSAT or not LSAT knowledge, your outside knowledge at the door. Because you may know that is, I have to imagine it's not 0.5 degree Celsius. That might be high, it might be low. I don't actually know.
Yeah.
But for our purposes, it's 0.5 degree, not more, not less. And this is just a fact. There's nothing to argue with here. Whether I mean, you goofballs if you like don't think that's real. Separate issue. But either way, that is the fact. They could tell you that it's cooled down 10 degrees, which obviously we know it all hasn't. If they had said that, you would still have to take that as gospel for our purposes. So I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, cool. Half a degree Celsius hotter. Let's see what's up with that. So they tell us this warming is primarily the result of the buildup of minor gases in the atmosphere, blocking the outward flow of heat from the planet.
Okay. And just for context for anyone listening, that's the end of the argument. It just stops there. There's nothing more. And right away, like, okay, I guess, but there's no evidence for this. Or they just kind of drop this. Like, this is the explanation for the warming, that okay, there's been this buildup of gases in the atmosphere. Which of course, in the real world, that's often what how we understand like global warming with greenhouse gases or whatever. But it doesn't matter what we know or think again in the real world. The LSAT doesn't care what you know. In this situation, like, okay, it could be true that the buildup of minor gases is causing this temperature increase, but it might not be. We don't know either way. They just kind of leave us hanging with this.
Yeah, and this is
There's no
where
evidence.
I would want to come in and be a skeptic with a million different reasons as to why. Because, Earth is warming. That isn't premise. We
Mhm.
cannot argue with that. But when they say it's because of the gases, I'm like, is it though? Do you have proof of that? Is it
Yeah.
possible that they're like, what if everyone has just turned on their heater all year round and the cumulative effect of everyone running their heater has warmed the Earth? Probably not real. Also, theoretically, could have warmed the Earth. What if the sun got hotter? Like, obviously ridiculous, but theoretically, that could have led to more stuff. It's also possible like the ozone layer broke down, which would be like our kind of like insulation breaking down as opposed to building up. I don't know why that would lead to heat, but I'm not a science nerd. I'm an LSAT person trying to be a lawyer and just come up with any reason why this could be wrong. Maybe volcanoes
Yeah.
went off. I don't know. Like there's just so many.
Because it's just this last century. It's a specific time frame too. So like, even if maybe, I don't know, over a longer time frame, this has been what's causing an increase. Although also kind of unlikely because I feel like industrial activity that's resulted in gas buildup is a modern phenomenon.
Yeah. Well,
The
also
point is we just don't know, right?
another nitpicky thing. What is a minor gas? I know what gases are, CO2 is gas, methane, but does
That's
minor
true.
gas only refer to other things? Like what if CO2 is a major gas? And that's something
I would feel like CO2
like,
is a major gas. Like the
yeah,
gases that we
so
hear about, maybe it's like, I don't know, maybe they're referring to like something like hydrogen or helium. I don't know. But the thing is we don't know. Like we don't have that definition. Um, so even if it's true that maybe the buildup of major gases is the primary source of warming, that doesn't necessarily mean minor gases. There's just a lot of information we just don't have here
yeah.
that doesn't
The
establish
other
it.
important thing to notice is like we're not trying to be scientifically accurate here. We do not need to actually be sticking to like what is realistic. We're just coming with what are actual reasons that could lead to it not being the buildup of minor gases. Because whether this is a weakener, strengthener, flaw, assumption, whatever question type they give us, it's always going to come back to kind of like what was the missing piece here. And the missing piece is that we have literally no evidence that it's the gases, which is tricky because from outside knowledge, we know that this probably is the reason why we have a buildup of warmth, but they have not established that here. And this is all the evidence we have for our purposes. So, yeah, let's see what they ask us. So they say, which one of the following, if true, would count as evidence against the scientist's explanation of Earth's warming? So yeah, we're being
Right.
asked to weaken his argument. Like what his explanation is minor gases. What would destroy that explanation?
Yeah, literally, basically, some of the things we mentioned, it's a little bit unclear exactly what they'll choose to give as evidence that suggests that the gases are not what's causing this temperature increase. But at the same time, it just takes literally anything that suggests the minor gases are not responsible for this temperature increase. So anything that would do that for us, suggesting maybe
Yeah.
something else that is responsible for the increase, that would do it. Um,
And yeah, another thing that's worth noting is because often on these ones, they're going to give you tangential stuff that seems like it matters, but it does not. So, like, what matters here is basically are minor gases causing the warming of Earth? That is it. That's all we care about. If they start talking about like some of them come from cows, whereas others come from factories, I would be like, okay, I don't care where they're coming from. I just care what effect they are
what's
having
causing
on
it?
the Earth's temperature. So, because they have these, I'd say superficially tempting answers to the un-LSAT prepped person, but it just does not matter. Which brings us to A, which says only some of the minor gases whose presence in the atmosphere allegedly resulted in the phenomenon described by the scientist were produced by industrial pollution.
And this is exactly what you're referring to here. Like, okay, but even if it is just some of them, then it still could presumably have this effect. It doesn't have to be all of these minor gases. It could still result in it. And then it also says here, produced by, yeah, industrial pollution, like the source. Again, we don't care where these gases are coming from. They've never talked about this, I don't think. Yeah, they've never
Yeah,
talked
like
about
who cares?
industrial
It's just
pollution.
what we care about is like, are the minor gases the cause? Is like, here's where they come from. I'm like, yeah, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the source of the gases. We're talking about the effect of them. So, and then even if we did care about where they come from, which we don't, but even if we did, only some is so soft. It's like, okay, some of them do, but some of them don't. So like, who cares? So,
Yeah, it's
because
just so
Madeline
vague.
was kind of focusing in on that first one, if I identified, I couldn't focus in on the other. They're both correct. Oh, well, they're both valid reasons why this is wrong. Like it's wrong for multiple reasons. And it's like I would say both of these are equally damning. That just like sink this answer. Like neither of these can be justified. Okay, that brings us to B, which says most of the warming occurred before 1940, while most of the buildup of minor gases in the atmosphere occurred after 1940.
Okay, so this is giving us some new information that to me suggests that the minor gases are not causing this warming because the warming occurred in the first half of the century, but these gases, were built up in the latter half of the century. So if there's this disconnect in the timeline where the warming happened before the gases that are allegedly causing the warming, then how can the gases be causing the warming if the warming came first? So this to me seems pretty compelling. What's interesting about this answer choice is, and this is I think common in questions like this, is they don't necessarily handhold you through the answer choice or spell it out for you. Like it's on us to realize that this information is implying that the gases are not causing the warming. They don't literally say the gases are not causing the warming. What it's implied because the warming came first and the gases came later. But we have to make that connection. And that sometimes can be, this one's not like too bad, but sometimes in especially more challenging questions, the correct answer, it's often the implication of what they're literally saying that will weaken it. They don't handhold us necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it really is like what Madeline hit on, which is that this timeline, if you think through it, it pretty clearly demolishes this argument saying like, hey,
Mhm.
the warming came before the gases. Hence, how could the gases possibly cause the warming? Like, if thing one causes thing two, but thing one only occurred after thing two, thing one better have a time machine because otherwise there's just no way to have this causal relationship. Now, you have to think that through yourself, but if you do, it gets you right to B. So let's see what these other ones say. Answer choice C says, over the last century, Earth received slightly more solar radiation in certain years than it did in others.
Okay, so this one I think at surface level can seem appealing. It kind of sounds like it's giving an alternate explanation, like, oh, maybe this solar radiation is perhaps causing the warming. But there's a couple issues here. So first off, the certain years than other years, then all we know, or for all we know, it can be all things equal, like the same, right? That it just will even out. And in the last century, it's the same amount of solar radiation. There's some more in some years, less in the other. It could be the same or even less overall. We don't know. It doesn't actually really tell us anything conclusively. Another thing too is, does solar radiation necessarily heat the Earth or result in an increased temperature? I think it's likely, arguably it's a fair assumption, but it's also maybe not necessarily true. We don't know how that works either.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I don't have as much of an issue with solar radiation.
yeah.
I think we can read that as largely
Yeah, I think
like
it's
like
fair.
heat. I mean, that being said, being nitpicky is good, but like the bigger issue is people often, I think, misread. See, I was saying over the past century, we got more sun than last century, but that's
Yeah.
not what it means. What it says is in certain years, we got more sun than in other years. So it's
Yeah.
comparing like 1939 to 1940 and saying like one of these years was cold, whereas another was hot. And that does not explain why we've had buildup over the past century, because that's just like it fluctuates just like our weather fluctuates, which does not help us. What we want to look for is like long-term trends and talk about
Yeah.
climate, whereas C is just talking about the weather. And it's like, yeah, the weather, some days are hot, some days are cold. Like,
Yeah, for all we know, then it's over the last century has been the same. There's been no like trend change.
yeah, exactly. All right, so that brings us to D, which says volcanic dust and other particles in the atmosphere reflect much of the sun's radiation back into space before it can reach Earth's surface.
Okay, so to me, this is suggesting like a cooling effect. If it's reflecting the sun's, here we are with, I guess, the sun's radiation, which I guess is, yeah, that could equate to heating the Earth. But if it's reflecting back before it can reach the Earth's surface, to me, that again suggests a cooling effect, which, if anything, then would strengthen our claim for the minor gases being responsible for the warming, because it's not, Dia suggesting it's not going to be the solar radiation, it's not going to be extra heat from the sun.
Yeah.
It's being reflected back.
Yeah, we would have less radiation getting into Earth's like atmosphere, and hence with less sun, we would have less heat. So D is relevant in that it does speak to the cause of Earth's warming. But if anything, it would strengthen the idea because it's eliminating volcanic dust and other particles. So yeah, it's just, if anything, this would lead to Earth being cooler, which is a problem because we're trying to explain why it's hotter for some reason other than minor gases. And then E says the accumulation of minor gases in the atmosphere has been greater over the last century than at any other time in Earth's history.
And I think this one again arguably strengthens, not particularly well, because we don't know how temperature increases have compared in other centuries. Um, so we don't know. Maybe in prior centuries there also were temperature increases, and so it's still kind of inconclusive. But if anything, this is going more towards a strengthened direction, because it's like, oh wait, the gases are a big deal, like, and the temperature has increased. But again, we don't know, in prior centuries the temperature could have increased as well, so again we still don't necessarily have that causal connection, but it's certainly not weakening it.
Yeah, if anything, it would be a strengthener because it's saying this kind of gas, this whole warming connection is in fact, well, I guess we're just really emphasizing the gas aspect of it, saying that there is
Yeah.
a gas. We know there was warming, hence we have a correlation. Now,
Yeah.
correlation is not causation, and Madeline makes a good point of we're not really comparing this to the warmth of any other centuries because maybe we have hotter centuries in the past, which would make this even more confusing. But
Mhm.
it definitely doesn't weaken it. So we can go to E, and at this point, pretty confidently go with B. There's nothing else that really hits. If you enjoyed what we talked about today or learned something new, please leave a review or a rating. It really does help us out and helps us reach more people. If you have a question or anything you want talked about in the world of LSAT or law school admissions, you can always email support@heyfuturelawyer.com to get it in the podcast agenda. Just put podcast in the subject and we will talk about it on the show. Alrighty, that's all we have for today. So I will see you all next time.